I think I've told myself about 100 times to not make this type of video again. I swear, every time that I even thought about it, I basically walked up from my chair, went to the mirror and told myself, don't you do this, Marco, don't you put your thoughts out there. It's not worth it anymore. The developers already said that they're not looking to make changes to the gear set, and it will only bring more angry comments, more dislikes and all that stuff from people that don't agree with you. If the game stays exactly the way that it is right now, I wouldn't care too much. Yes, I know that Striker, Nomad and Predator are by far the most used sets in PvP. And they are for good reason. And yeah, some gear sets like Sentry, FireCrest and Tactician just aren't as good in comparison. But honestly, that's okay by me. We do not live in a perfect world, and I'll just play whatever is the strongest and look good with it on stream. I'm fine with that too, you know? Let's go that way. So I could have kept silent, I could have just kept my mouth shut, but it turns out that it is actually a lot of you guys who wanted me to talk about changing, nerfing or buffing some of these gear sets to make them either less overpowered in PvP or make them a bit stronger. I've had a lot of questions about all these type of things in my streams, in my comment sections, and especially after the tier list video, everybody's been asking me how I would change some of the weaker sets to make them more viable. So yeah, this is basically me just giving my answer to all those questions. I want to talk about what I would do if I were a developer. Now don't worry, I will not be pushing these ideas towards anybody. I will not be asking the dev personally to change X or Y stat because I'd think that the game would be better that way. I will not use my superior YouTube position to try and bend the rules my way. Even though, honestly, I don't really have that kind of influence, even with a YouTube channel. But some of you, I know you'll never believe that, no matter how many times I say that. This video is just going to be a what-if scenario. What if I was a developer? What if I was in a position to balance the game? How would I do it? What would I do with, let's say, patch 1.8.1? My imaginary balance patch that I just made out of thin air. What would I do with the game? And yes, most of the changes that I'm going to put through in this imaginary patch, so to speak, they are mostly with the intention to balance out the PvP game a bit more, which also means that these changes are going to affect some of these gear sets in PvE. Some gear sets will be slightly worse in PvE and others will be slightly stronger as a result. Of course, never to the point where those gear sets will not be good options anymore. I mean, I did really try to keep the PvE game in mind. But inevitably, some of these things, they just could not be circumvented. They're gonna affect the PvE game a little bit. Last thing I'll say is that I also wanted to keep this imaginary patch a bit realistic, so there will not be anything in this video that would require any significant work from the developers. Of course, you could look at every gear set and just completely change the whole way that the gear set is played. Like, for example, the developers did with the new AlphaBridge, and those ideas could be cool, but that's not what these ideas are set to do. Again, it's supposed to be a balance pass, a very small PvP balance pass. So if you like a certain gear set right now because of the playstyle, if you like Striker, Predator, Nomad, whatever gear set, you're probably still going to like them after the changes that I'm going to lay out for you. All that's going to change is just some very, very small numbers, but you can tell me after how you like the changes. To start off on the right track and prove to you that I'm not just here to dumpster the gear sets that I currently don't play with, I'll talk about the gear set that I've been using myself first, which is Striker. We're going to talk about changing Striker a little bit first. Now, if you've watched my gear set tier list video, you'll notice me mentioning Striker a lot. I pretty much compare every DPS gear set there is to Striker. Why play with Alpha and get a tech link if you can have 100% Striker stacks? Why take the 45% Banshee damage if you can have 100% Striker stacks? Striker not only has damage, Striker also has healing. Striker this, Striker that, Striker so forth and forth and forth. It's quite obvious that Striker is pretty much the most dominant gear set for PvP and for PvE right now because it just has so many things to it. It has the enemy armor damage, which is great for PvE. It has stability, which is good on console. It comes with a ton of damage. It comes with good healing. It has a lot of survivability as a result of it. It's just a very, very strong gear set. So yeah, if we were to do a balance pass, I would start by making some small nerfs to Striker to maybe bring this more in check with the other gear sets. Now, I do not want to take away the potential damage that you can get from this set, because that's something that people have always liked about it. It's about landing shots consistently and then building up damage that way. So capping the stacks at 50% or something, which a lot of people have been suggesting, I just don't think that's the right way to go. And I also do not want to take away the healing, as some other people might have suggested, because the healing allows this set to be a better solo set. It allows it to be very useful for solo players, both in PvE and in PvP. So I don't really want to take away the potential strength of the gear set, but I do think that that maximum potential strength is a little bit too easy to utilize. I think that the stacks are a little bit too much of a guaranteed thing at this point. You hit a shot, you get 2 stacks. You miss a shot and you lose 1 stack. This is very, very powerful. It's exactly the opposite from the 4-piece, which was a little bit too punishing in my opinion, but the 4-piece costs you to lose 2 stacks for missing and only gives you 1 stack for hitting. And I think that, yeah, where the 4-piece was too punishing is where the 6-piece is too forgiving. I think that to balance out the 6-piece properly, I think the 6-piece should only give and lose 1 stack for either hitting or missing a bullet respectively. Or if you want to allow players to still stack up as fast as they can stack up right now with assault rifles or with shotguns, then I would give players 2 stacks for hitting, but also 2 stacks for missing a bullet. Especially the second option allows Striker to be just as strong potentially in any PvE and in PvP content, but the user will have to land shots more consistently, he will have to miss less shots, so to speak, so they aren't as much of a guaranteed thing. You'll have to work for them a little bit more and your aim starts to matter a lot more as well. Now on top of that change, I would also slightly reduce the stacks that players can get from a shotgun pellet. I would put it on a 0.75 multiplier, so that 1 shot with the shotgun, which is 8 pellets, would now not give 16 stacks, but 12 stacks instead. This is to kind of combat the insanely fast stacking through the showstopper or the auto-aim shotguns on console a bit more, because I think that's very, very powerful, all things considered. Even if we put the first change that I suggested to Striker, if we put that through and put it in the game, then through the showstopper or through the SAHG, people are still going to stack up almost instantly at close range, which is then way too powerful in comparison again. So that's why I would go through with that change. Now, I don't think that these changes are enough to truly dethrone Striker as the best overall gear set in the game. But that's okay, we're just trying to tune it down, and this would be my first pass on it. For Sentry, I'd like to do something with the 6-piece to make it more viable in PvP. Obviously, having the complete 6-piece enabled in PvP, that would be too strong, that would be kinda broken. So to start it off with, I would not grant a user the 100% headshot damage on somebody that's already at 6 stacks, because that could result in some really nasty stuff. And I would also not allow it to spread marks to other agents when you shoot at somebody that already has stacks on them. But what I would allow is for somebody to be tagged by up to 6 stacks, in which case they take 30% extra damage. Now 30% extra damage, that's quite a lot, and usually the sentry marks they last for 30 seconds, and they can also be refreshed every time that you hit a headshot on the opponent. So in the case of PvE, if you just keep headshotting and headshotting and headshotting an opponent every 30 seconds, this NPC basically takes 30% extra damage from all sources permanently, and I think that that would be way too strong in PvP as well. So to properly implement the sentry stacks to a point where they wouldn't be too strong, I think it would be a nice idea to lower the duration of the stacks on players to 15 seconds. So if you hit somebody with a semi-automatic weapon, then that sentry mark is only gonna last for 15 seconds. And then on top of that, once you hit a player with the 6th mark on top of his head, the duration of those marks cannot be refreshed anymore. So the enemy is gonna have to go through 15 seconds of taking 30% increased damage, but after that, the stacks are guaranteed to be removed. I think this would be a fair implementation. It would be a serious challenge for a sentry player to stack up a 4-man team all the time, and once somebody has max stacks, they just have to avoid fire for 15 seconds, and then the sentry player has to go start again. Maybe this implementation will not make Sentry a top tier gear set right away, but I think it would at least push it in the tier 2 range for a group play in PvP without affecting PvE in any way at all. Tacticians is a very easy fix in my opinion, just remove some of the barriers that the gear set comes with. When you have the 6-piece equipped, your stacks can go up to 60%. Period. No barriers. And when you use a skill at 60% stacks, there's a chance for the stacks to go back down to 30% instead of 60%. Honestly, in my opinion, that would fix Tacticians. That would put it right there on tier 1 or tier 2 as a viable skill build for PvP, while also buffing it a bit in PvE, because honestly, even in PvE, it's a little bit underwhelming. You're much better off getting something like Inventive with the 4-piece or a Barrett or something like that. So Tacticians could use some love for both PvE and for PvP. I would let this go hand in hand with a very, very small change to the PvP modifier for the Sticky Bomb though. Nothing that affects PvE of course, but with the stacks being so easy to obtain, I'm afraid that the Sticky Bomb might make an unfavorable return. I'm not saying that I want the Sticky Bomb to be useless, but it shouldn't be so easy to one-shot people with it at max stacks. So a small adjustment to the PvP modifier, I'd say about 10%, that would be enough. And then we have a very good tactician gear set in PvE and PvP as well. A lot of people are probably going to hate me for my Nomad idea, but I would simply just like to disable the 6-piece when you're in a group and in the dark zone at the same time. This would mean that when you're in a group and when you're in the dark zone, you would still get the free health bar. When you fall to 0 health, you would still get that, but it would not go hand in hand with the damage resilience that you get from the 6-piece or the chance to get another health bar for free afterwards. I think the whole idea of Nomad is great for solo players. It gives everybody a fighting chance or a fleeing chance versus groups that they otherwise would have died to for certain. It has a good amount of sustain for PvE if you just want to farm, and I don't think that anything about this gear set is unfair if you are fighting someone solo. But when you're fighting groups and groups and groups of players that are just stacked up with Nomads, it can get really, really tiresome to fight them. No matter how well you do, how good your aim is, how good your team composition is, if you have 10 players coming at you with Nomad, the game simply does not allow you to confirm kills, and it's eventually just going to cause you to get overwhelmed because those 10 players, they might all be bad players, but because they are simply not dying all their damage and their nades and their skills, it's all going to stack up versus you. It makes the Rogue game a lot harder than even Rogue 2.0 intended it to be, and I don't think that this is very healthy for the game. And of course, you can make a very edgy comment right now. Fuck the Rogues, finally those spawn camping assholes get what they deserve. And if that's your opinion, then, you know, so be it. Then this video wasn't meant for you anyway. I'm okay with, you know, the changes to Rogue 2.0. I like that it is a challenge, but I also don't think that the Rogue disadvantage should be as big as it currently is with all the grouped players running around with Nomad. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Again, this is not going to affect PvE because, of course, outside of the DZ, even in skirmish, and in last stand, I would just allow the 6-piece to always work, even when you're in a group. I would only disable it when you're A, in a dark zone, and then B, also in a group at the same time. In this case, it would be a very slight nerf to PvE within a group within the dark zone. Hunter's Fate could use a very, very slight bump up as well. I think the damage is definitely on point. This gear set is definitely able to let you one-shot people once you get enough stacks. But I think that it's currently just a little bit too easy to lose the stacks. It currently takes 10 seconds, a weapon swap or a weapon reload, to lose all of the stacks that you've built up. I would simply turn those 10 seconds into 15 seconds. I think snipers already have one of the most difficult times in the division. It's very hard to land those shots on good players because they will just move to the left and the right, and it's even harder when they're pushing on you because then they're just constantly healing each other up, overhealed, and it's really hard to take one down with a sniper before they get close enough, at which point there isn't much that you can do as a sniper unless you land some really nice shots. So the whole thought process behind this is that snipers, they oftentimes have to reposition. When groups are pushing up on them, they oftentimes have to move further back, and then they can only peek at certain corners, and then they have to run a bit more. And I think that these 5 extra seconds that you would keep the stacks, it would be a good change because it would allow those snipers to reposition in between taking shots with a little more ease without being at risk of losing their stacks right away. That's basically why I wanted to make this change. Deadeye honestly needs to change to the 6-piece. I really like the idea of killing somebody with a headshot to get more crit, but the truth is that it is just far too situational. You almost never get this buff, and when you do, you lose it almost instantly because you have to stay scoped in to keep it. I would really like to change this. I would like to change to the headshot kill mechanic to just a headshot. Let the damage count up after landing just a headshot with Deadeye, and let the user keep the buff for the full duration even after scoping out and then scoping back in. When you play Deadeye, the vast majority of your damage will be coming from body shots because that's the thing that you aim for. Body shots give you the exact same damage as headshots with Deadeye, so going for the head is a huge risk in loss of DPS because you have to aim much more precisely to actually hit the head, and thus you can't spam shots as much as you could previously. And because it is such a huge risk, I think that there should be some kind of decent reward. It is not instantly lost when you unscope your weapon either. Allowing the user to unscope and rescope is also a very key part of making this buff useful because especially on console, it is oftentimes very, very difficult to swap from target to target when you're looking through a scope, because not only is the field of view very, very small, so you're only limited to see a very small part of the whole fight of what's going on your screen. And of course, on console, the turn speed is also horrendously low when you're scoping in with a sniper, even when you're on the max sensitivity. This is of course partly a controls issue, so to go with the Deadeye rework, so to speak, I would also increase the max aim speed when you're scoped in on console to about 200%, just let the bar go up to 200% if that's something that players would want. It would be a nice quality of life change for sure, and combined with the requirement to just land a headshot instead of a headshot kill and allowing players to zoom in and out without losing the buff, that would really make the 6-piece Deadeye worth your time. Now, a lot of people are saying 100% crit damage, that's way too much, that's way too strong, but keep in mind, you first have to land a headshot with Deadeye, and the 100% extra critical hit damage is going to be added in the additive way to all the critical hit damage that you already have on your Deadeye build to begin with. So it's only going to account to, I'd say, about a 40% damage increase in the best case scenario. So really, 100% critical hit damage, it sounds strong, but it's not really that strong if you do the math. Then, next up, we get to Predator, the set that you've probably all expected me to butcher and trash can all the way down to tier 6 or something, but that is not what I'm going to do. I'm only going to make a very, very small change to Predator, because I feel like Predator is one of those gear sets that will drop down to trash tier very fast if you take away just a few small things. If you let immunity block the Predator's mark, then Predator's mark is useless versus groups. If you're one of those people that think that the buff should be scaling with firearms, the damage buff from the bleed should be scaling with firearms and not with stamina, then Predator would start to do an insane amount of damage, because your bullets would not only hit really hard, but the bleed would also hit even harder. So yeah, in fact, I'm going to keep all of those things. I'm going to allow the Predator bleed to cut through the immunity. I'm keeping the damage scaling with stamina. Yes, the full 120% damage. And instead, to counter Predator, I want to rework the adrenaline talents just a little bit to offer players a bit more counterplay to the bleed itself. I would allow the adrenaline talent to give players that 7 seconds of immunity, and I would like it to also work versus the Predator bleed. This would still force out a medkit from the opposing players if they get tagged by the bleed, and it would force the opposing players to dedicate one of his player talents just towards dealing with the Predator bleed. But this would allow everybody, especially the solo players, to get rid of a bleed and have some counterplay without instantly be tagged by the bleed again after popping a medkit. This would mean that not every random with an immunizer will be able to shut down this gear set like it's nothing, but it does allow everybody to fight a Predator with a little bit more consistency and ease, which I believe is needed, and then the Predator can counterplay by avoiding the other player after he sees he pops a medkit for 7 seconds, so it comes this game of cat and mouse of two players fighting each other, but the bleed wouldn't be so dominant anymore. That isn't all that I would do though, because I would also make one very small change to the 6-piece as well, because currently the bleed can also crit on players, and this crit is based off of your own crit chance and critical hit damage. And I believe that for PvP this can get a little bit out of control, because players can run around with 100% critical hit damage or sometimes even more, which then suddenly makes the bleed deal twice the amount of damage as the previous 3 ticks, which means that the time to kill with the bleed is a lot more random and a lot less predictable. In patch 1.4, we made headshot damage and critical hit damage additive with each other to create a more predictable time to kill and move away from the sudden damage spikes when fighting another player. I believe that Predator sort of suffers from the same problem right now. Sometimes it can be really hard to predict when the bleed is going to kill you, because it didn't really do that much damage for the previous 3 ticks, but then because the next tick is a crit, you suddenly lose half of your health bar. So what I would do is I would reduce the player's critical hit damage by 50% for bleed ticks, so that when a player is tagged by the bleed, it is easier to predict how much time that player has before he dies if he is unable to cleanse the bleed. It means that critical hit chance and critical hit damage is going to be a little bit less important to have on a Predator build for PvP, but it would at least open up more counterplay, it would make the gear set a little bit less cheesy, and again, it will do it without affecting PvE in any way, shape or form, because reducing critical hit damage on players would apply to players, not NPCs. And then we get the Banshee, which honestly doesn't need that much more, with Striker, Nomad and Predator falling a bit more in place with the other sets. Because of all the previous changes that we've made, I think Banshee is going to rise up higher, because that extra damage that you're getting is going to be stronger relatively. I would still like to see some utility type of buffs for this set when running within a group, but this may not be possible because things like what I'm about to suggest might take a lot of development time, so take it for what it is again. But what I would like to see for Banshee for rogue players is maybe a permanent pulse around you across like 50 meters without any critical hit chance or critical hit damage, but it would allow you to see players coming from a little bit further away. This would of course allow you to survive a manhunt with a little more ease, which is what the Banshee gearset is partly about. You would be able to see if there would be players at the manhunt station waiting for you to go there, waiting for you to catch you, see if you want to buy off. And that's just a small thing that I would like Banshee to have. Other than that, I kind of just want to leave it where it is right now and see how well it does when we look at all the other gearsets and all the changes we've made so far. FireCrest needs two things in my opinion. First up, it should give the user immunity to fire. No one wants to be set on fire by their own fire explosions and their own fire nades and all that stuff. And having 100% fire resistance would also be a nice added benefit when fighting another FireCrest player or somebody with airburst seekers. Second up, I would also tune the fire turret damage in PvP a bit up again. I definitely agree that the fire turrets did too much damage in patch 1.7 and before, but reducing the damage by 65% in PvP for 1.8, that was a bit overkill in my opinion. I would turn the multiplier up from 35% to 50% and see where that puts it in the game. That would make it a 43% damage buff to other players in PvP, which, you know, it's a significant amount, but right now it also hits like a wet noodle, and it kind of makes FireCrest a useless set for PvP, considering that it's also pretty easy to EMP the turret all the time with an EMP sticky or a nade, and this would at least help FireCrest players a little bit. These changes, they would not make FireCrest a tier 1 set, but it would at least help push it up a bit more. And then, the last gear set that I want to talk about is AlphaBridge, and honestly, I don't really know what to do with this set. I think it's kind of bullshit that to get value out of the 6-piece bonus, you basically have to mitigate the 4-piece effect, because the 4-piece gives you free weapon talents, but then the 6-piece requires you to have equal main stats across the board, so those talents were going to be unlocked anyway. So to start it off with, I would remove the ult duration scaling from the main stat distribution, and honestly, that's all I would do to this set. Alpha is one of those gear sets where it's very hard to predict how good it will be when so many other gear sets are also going to be receiving changes. So if this was my patch, I would kind of let it sit there with this one change and then see how it does compared to the rest. This also means that I would indeed not change Final Measure, Lone Star, Reclaimer or D3 in any way. I think all of those gear sets are already in a well-balanced spot for PvP. They're all pretty unique, they're fun to play, and they're not necessarily overpowered in any way, shape or form. They're just really good gear sets, and that's it. Oh, and also, I would make Skirmish and Last Stand scale all the main stats up to 1401. I've already said this before, time and time again, but I really think it's kind of shitty that people have to build their builds in two different ways in order to get some gear set bonuses to work properly, and their weapon talents and all that stuff. But yeah, that is pretty much all that I have to say. If we sum this up, you'll notice that the only gear sets that see a slight nerf in PvE are Striker, but that's only if you miss shots or use a shotgun. Nomad, but that's only if you PvE within a group in the Dark Zone. But other than just those two gear sets in those two scenarios, no, we have no nerfs to any gear sets when it comes down to the PvE game. While at the same time, I believe that we did a good job at balancing out the gear sets for PvP. It's not going to be perfect, some gear sets are still going to be better than others in more situations, but I think that this would at least make the PvP a better, more balanced experience. If I was a developer, this is how I would change the gear sets going into patch 1.8.1, my imaginary balance update. And now I'm kind of curious, what do you think about this list? Does some of this stuff sound weird, bad, unfair, or unbalanced? Would it ruin the game? Would I ruin the experience for you again? Or does it actually look decent this time? Let me know what you guys think. Please keep it civil though. I know some of you are gonna lash out for me for talking about balance again anyway, but you know, that's just that. That's just YouTube. But I would like to have an actual conversation about these things. Even though most of these changes are likely never going to happen, which I would be fine with as well. Again, we're not in a situation where we do this or the game is doomed. If nothing changes, I'll just play Striker 95% of the time and then Nomad for the other 5%, and I'm fine with that as well. But I just wanted to share my thoughts on the gear sets and how I would change them. That's going to be all for me today though. As always, I will see you guys later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.